That's one way to look at it. It's like multiple bogies on a larger train, if you will. Sometimes it might not fit that picture because maybe there are no dependencies. Sometimes it's just parallel work streams of work, in which case, you might not even need a dedicated team. You might have parallel portfolios, parallel programs, but the idea is that the product represents some sort of a holistic picture. And then areas of the product will be, independent pieces that are small enough that can be delivered in a reasonable time frame, but at the same time large enough that they can independently stand and provide some business value. But overall, they all tie up to some sort of a coherent story you're trying to build or coherent narrative you're trying to sell to the customer. That's the idea. Let's has a lot of examples around how to have holistic product focus. Speaking of holistic product focus, there's a lovely book that I generally recommend for Scrum Masters to read, which does two things. One, it deepens your own personal operational vocabulary in terms of how you think about certain strategies. And second, it also gives you a lot of principles that you can use to influence change for the better in the organization. So here is the book. Just put in the chat window. It's called The Fifth Discipline by Peter Senge. Peter Senge has started the Sloan School of Management at MIT. He teaches he's taught there for like 20 odd years. Very popular author in the org design and the systems thinking phase. His book Fifth Discipline is probably one of the most sought after books in the org design and systems thinking space. Highly recommend to buy it and read it, and hopefully you will get some benefit out of that. It's got like a collection of 12 or 14 principles. There's things like, how do you recognize that today's problems have come from yesterday's solution, so you don't repeat the same repetitive trends of impediments or mistakes that you make? How to recognize points of highest leverage in a system? Basically root cause analysis. So how do you detach yourself emotionally from the situation, and then you look at the root cause? A lot of the stuff that business analysts or systems analysts do on a regular basis in terms of gap analysis and as is versus to be analysis. Systems thinking puts a nice little spin on it from a management perspective. So take a look at it. You might get some value out of that. But basically, to be able to see it is empirical planning or empiricism. Like I said earlier, just means you're driven off of experience. So the more you do stuff, the more you learn, right? So you're doing it and then you're learning further by doing it. So the whole product management cycle of building something, then measuring the feedback once you give it to your customer, and then learning from that feedback, that build, measure, learn cycle essentially is empirical planning. Scrum is a push-based system. Kanban is a pull-based system. In Scrum, you push work as a team into a certain backlog and you lock the backlog while the time box is running. You don't mess with scope. So scope is frozen, if you will. At the end of the time box, you look back and see how the time box went, and you inspect and adapt to a course of improvement based on how the time box went. Kanban is the opposite, which means Kanban is a pull-based system. So in Kanban, you're not going to have a time box like sprints. Like sprints are best with consistent durations. I'm sure for those of you who are familiar with Scrum, you would have heard this word sprint used a lot, right? Sprint essentially is a consistent duration of time. And all you're trying to do is build that psychological habit of doing a certain amount of work in a certain fixed amount of time. So if you're doing a 1 week sprint or a 3 week sprint, you always do 1 week sprints or 3 week sprints. The reason why you do that is you're trying to trick your brain into creating batch sizes that are predictable over time. So it's always a 1 week sprint. What will change is how much work you do in the 1 week sprint. Sometimes you do more, sometimes you do less, but the time remains the same. So the work has to fit the time boundary, not the other way around. The time boundary is not going to forcibly fit your understanding of the work. Very big pivot from how you used to, as project managers, add stuff into your Microsoft project plan. If you remember the Microsoft project plan days where you would lay out a work breakdown structure and then you would lay out time boxes for each of those tasks, there you were making the time fit your point in time understanding of the work. In Agile, we flip that. In Agile, we say we have no control over time. The 24 hours that the earth rotates is common for everybody, regardless of which part of the world you live in, right? So all you're trying to do is you're saying that time is always moving at the same pace. The work we do in that predefined amount of time, that can change over time. So in Kanban, because a lot of your work is either going to be repeatable or interrupt driven, which means either it'll be exactly the same thing that you did the last time, or it'll be completely new, which means you don't have a line of sight. So you don't want to hold yourself hostage to a predefined time box, right? So in Kanban, you don't have the concept of sprints. In Kanban, you have cycles, which are also iterative by nature, which means you go back and forth. But cycles don't need to be consistent durations. You can have 3 parallel work streams of work with 3 different cycle durations, all concurrently being run on the same team. First cycle is 2 days of work, second cycle is 2 weeks of work, third cycle is 3 weeks of work. And the team members are skipping, hopping, and jumping across these 3 work streams. And there you're pulling based on available capacity. So as soon as one of these cycles are done and I have some capacity, I'm going to pull in more work. I'm not bound by a duration of a sprint there. That's the key difference between Scrum versus Kanban, or say development versus operations work. Operations work usually is either unplannable work, which comes at the last minute, like your production support and things like that, or it is actual keep the lights on, different companies call it different things. I've heard like KTLO, which is keep the lights on, RTB, which is run the business, BAU, business as usual, basically a repeatable piece of work, maintenance and operations that you're running. Kanban is more suited for that. Scrum is more for, say, active, plannable software development, hardware fabrication. Basically, anything that's plannable, you would use a cadence-based approach like Scrum for it. Right? There are a whole bunch of other reasons. And like I said, I've already done this before in office hours. So please go back and find that video. Ask your point of contact. They will send you an exhaustive list of that. It has like 7 or 8 different reasons of why you want to choose Scrum versus Kanban, depending on the kind of work you're doing.